Are you sorry? Are you heartfully sorry for the sins you have committed? It matters not, for it is time for your just punishments. Hello, I am Charlie, the Professor Esser, and with me, as always, is my skinny rich friend.
It's Mozz.
Hey, Mozz, welcome to Season 1, Episode 3 of The Punisher, Kandahar. Frank skips the subtlety while interrogating Micro. Brutal memories of top-secret missions shed light on Frank's past. Directed by Andy Goddard. And our writers this week are Steve Lightfoot, who gets that created by credit. Steve Lightfoot also got the written by. Angela Lamanna, hardest working woman in show business, is our story editor. And Ken Christensen, hardest working man in show business, staff writer. Okay, so this is don't want to say fun episode, but I enjoyed it. We open up.
Yeah, I thought it took a little. Sorry.
No, please.
I was going to say, I thought it was. The first three episodes were powerhouse episodes. I think they took a little bit of a dip here, but there was a couple of things about this episode that were kind of a little funky to me. Relative to the first two episodes, which were just phenomenal on all accounts. But I guess we'll get into it a little bit better. But they did end off on a good note.
Yes. Well, this is very much a bottle episode in the present, though it's also a flashback episode, which takes us back to the city of the title, Kandahar. But before we get that, we get a naked Micro zip tied to a chair. Basically, I don't want to say being waterboarded, but definitely being put through his escape and evasion training.
Right.
Although, as a spook, he probably already went through this, much like any special forces guy would have. So, the effectiveness of these tactics on people of that training is going to be questionable from the start. As we do see. Micro definitely plays his role well in this. I felt, definitely makes us think he's at the disadvantage, but very quickly puts himself in a position where Frank is unable to effectively separate himself from what Micro is doing. Because, of course, Micro tells him that he's got this fail-safe, that if he does not enter a certain code with a retinal scan every, whatever, I forget what he said, whether it was 20 minutes or, it must have been a couple hours, every couple of hours, that basically all the footage that had been taken in the location for the last, 48 hours would get dumped onto the internet, so, which means that everyone would see Frank, know he's alive, yada, yada, yada. And he says he created this as a failsafe in case anyone ever did attack him. His death would be made public, and people would know.
Right. No, but initially he says that his little lair was rigged to blow. He says, at first he says that it is a bomb.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. I'm sorry. Yes, you are right. First he says it's a bomb.
Which is what I thought was really interesting, is because when he tells Frank that, instead of getting alarmed and trying to do something about it, he sort of sits back and just waits there. And it's like, is he sort of sitting there flirting with the idea that it could finally be over? Or is he sitting there thinking, oh, of course there's no bomb, and I know this because I have read him better than he's read me.
Yes. Well,
so I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. My take on that, excuse me, would have been that, Frank, would have, basically he would have thought the place would be rigged to blow, because that's what he would have done. And so would have already eliminated that as a possibility, that the place was rigged. That would be my reading of it. But, as with so many things, you can read it however you want. And it's it's a pretty cool episode in that sense. Because there's a lot of spy versus spy that we get
Right.
in the micro scenes back in the warehouse. Now we intersperse that with Russo and Frank. Frank and Russo just got that. Russo and Frank actually back as buddies back in Afghanistan, and
Yeah.
you know, being put into their super secret Delta Ops, Project Cerberus, don't
Mhm.
ask, don't tell adventure.
Yeah, I point, you shoot.
Yes, exactly. Good old Agent Orange.
Murder by numbers.
Yeah, well, which I think makes for an interesting point in that we get in the end of it. Um, in the sense that at the end of this, when Micro is saying, what's a missile without a guidance system?
Right.
But in many ways, he's giving the exact same pitch. You want to hurt the bad guys. I want to hurt the bad guys. Here's how we
Right.
hurt the bad guys. And that's the discussion we have. But let's not get ahead of ourselves because first we meet our crew. I love the guy who comes in and is like, we are the righteous hand of God and da da da. No, I'm just messing.
Oh. Yeah.
And of course, as soon as he did that, that guy was ending it poorly.
Yeah, but also it's funny. He played it off like it was a joke, but there was a moral strength to that character. That when they're burying Ahmad's body, he says, we're covering up evidence. Are we okay with this?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was some truth to letting your superior know, hey, these are my values and yada, yada, yada. So.
Yes, absolutely. And for what it's worth, these characters, for characters that we just had for a short while, they had some pretty great scenes, which I always love. I always love when small characters get big scenes. That's very important to me as a watcher of television shows. That small characters get a moment to shine.
Yeah.
But aside from him, most of the other characters, aside from Frank and Russo, they're like Agent Orange, who is just very much intended to be kind of a faceless entity.
Right. I mean, that's their job, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because these are the people who you do not, you don't ask questions and you don't find out things you shouldn't have found out in the first place.
Right.
And that's that. And it's interesting in this because we do see in this it is definitely revealed. I did not think it was going to be that case because I thought the timeline didn't work out, but I guess it does. Which is what's her name?
Dina?
Yeah, Dina's partner in Afghanistan is physically killed by Frank. That Frank is the guy who pulled the trigger on that.
Oh, okay. So, but how did you surmise that, other than the fact that the guy in the mask looked like him? Because I couldn't get anything further than that. Did you find something that was
maybe I
more
just.
pointed?
I mean, that was sort of how I took it. I mean, I thought it was him.
Okay.
And given
that's how I took it too.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, I took it as that, and basically what it is he seemed to be aware of it. He was aware that it occurred.
Right.
He was aware of what the story was.
Yeah, and he seemed to sort of be the one also that would relish the opportunity to be the tip of the as evidence at the very end when everybody doesn't know what to do. Frank's like, I gotta man up and take care of everybody at this point.
Well, but you know what? I think there's this idea about being the tip of the spear. The earliest superhero story that not really the earliest, but one of the classic superhero stories. Because really the tale of Enkidu, it's much more the modern superhero tale than Gilgamesh, even though he plays as a sidekick. But really, where you get a superhero as the main antagonist who does have that conflicted nature that we think of for modern superheroes, that first one is really Achilles. And Achilles in his tent during the Iliad, where he does not want to keep fighting. That the war is not pleasant. But of course, he does do what heroes must do. And this is what I think we see with Frank here as we approach the end of this episode. Not that he relishes being the beast, not that he relishes being the person, being Achilles, being the greatest warrior who can go in and totally wipe the floor with anything that comes across him. That it's actually, it is as much a curse as a blessing. That being the tip of the spear is great when you're throwing the spear. When you must actually be the spear, when you're literally smashing a guy's face with your bare knuckles, as we see at the very end of that scene.
Right.
You know, after all your friends have been slaughtered because of bad intel. You know, that is not pleasant. And you can see...
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's outside of the realm of his identity. You know, it's like those were pressures put on his identity to change it, but how he saw himself was as, you know, the one responsible for everyone. And the act itself might not have been pleasant, but what it gave him as, you know, a sense of identity, being that person that takes care of business, that takes care of his people. He really, really, I think, enjoyed the instrument that he was, but someone's mishandling of it, you know, sort of changed how he viewed himself. And I think that's what he had a problem with. That he was very proud of his instrument and his job and how well he did it, but someone misused it and caused him to view himself differently, and that's what he's so angry about.
Yeah.
That's how I saw it.
No, and that is a fair cop on it. You know, without a doubt, he definitely comes back changed. You know,
and it's an interesting point that they began with Kurt and his group meeting, where that soldier is talking about how friendly fire took out these good soldiers, and they got labeled as incompetent soldiers, you know, by some press guy trying to avoid the responsibility of their actions, or of the military's actions, by saying that they were ambushed by the enemy. And that to him, and I never saw that idea that way, because when he first says it, that he was really that upset about it, I was like, why would you be that upset about it? And it never dawned on me until he explained it to me that meant that they were bad soldiers in his eyes, and that was, and I was like, wow, that's a powerful thought and a feeling. And again, speaking to identity, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yes. And yeah. I mean, that is a very powerful moment. It is a very strong thing when you, and also for what it's worth, shows the different mindset between what you or I, as a non-military person, would see a story and how an actual military person would see it. You know, because you know, you or I, you know, if someone got ambushed, would say, "Oh man, not your fault, you got ambushed." But to a military person whose whole job is just don't get ambushed, you know, you never want to have it said that you got stupid, you know, and that of course is the crux of Yonder Biscuit. There is that, you know, the guy is mad because people are saying that his friends got stupid, and you know, that they let down their guard even for an instant, you know, as the old saying goes, you know. It's a great moment there, and we do get, you know, well, I'll get to Agent Orange in a minute, and what happens to him at the end of that story. Just prior to this, we get the Great Escape by Micro,
The other flashback we got was, of course, bored NSA analyst David receives a CD containing something very different than the usual useless info he has to sift through. The fame of the info disc. And it's kind of cool to get to see that scene between him and his wife and how vehemently she's against it. But when he, said, hey, this is what I signed up to do here. If I don't do this, how can I look the other guys in the eyes? Or again, for him, an idea of who am I really?
Exactly.
And that being more important than everything else.
Yeah. Although, not for nothing, his wife is absolutely right. This is a dumb idea.
For sure.
And it's obviously a dumb idea. Because because not for nothing, the horrors of that moment pale in comparison to so many things that preoccupy the modern world. And you have a world where the populace is too willing to look away. And, nothing gets brought down because of this. Nothing gets changed because of this. Just like every other whistleblower we've had recently, whether it's Snowden or Chelsea Manning or anybody else, you can blow that whistle, but there is a discomfort.
I think it's a little early. I think it's a little early to call it for nothing changed. I think it's a slow process.
Well, yeah.
I think the first portion of it is everybody know what it is, and then it's going to take decades, maybe years, for people to actually get fed up with what's going on. And then the next step is important. And I think what the failure of his wife in that moment was that she didn't communicate effectively that your identity depends on much more than just your job. Now you're this family. So which portion of your identity are you willing to protect? And she never faced him with that choice.
Yeah.
She just said, you'll make the choice however you feel it, but she didn't communicate effectively how bad of an idea that was and how much more there is to him than just his job.
Mm-hmm. And for what it's worth, you get that nice parallel there between the choice Frank made. Because Frank made the choice to walk away. To get back to your argument that he is the tip of the spear. He made the choice he would no longer be the tip of the spear. And while Russo went home and, started a private security firm, Frank just went home. And, what he did after that, I don't know. I have to imagine that he probably became a drill instructor. That in that perfect world, that's what he did, sort of like, and just sort of became a major dad kind of character. That's...
What I thought was interesting was they're building Russo up to be like a bad dude. But in that moment, when they come back from that engagement, the ambush or whatever, he is moved enough by that moment to say, we got to get out of here. We can't do this anymore. There's some shred of good in it, or at least there was back then, and we haven't seen how he transitions over to the dark side. Because I thought they gave us little glimpses of that when Frank and him are laying in their barracks, and he says something to the effect of like he actually enjoys it or revels in the action, Yeah. So I thought they were building towards that, but I thought it was surprising where Russo was like, "Hey, this is too much." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't think that's who you were, Russo."
Well, I mean, it all depends on how you interpret that scene. Because I interpreted that scene to basically be, we've got to go become private contractors. We can't be working for these spooks.
Right.
We've got to take control of our own story. We've got to be the guy.
Yeah, I like that much better.
Yeah.
That's
my take on it. Yeah.
No, I like that.
Yeah. So yeah, I think. See, to me, that was where you get the real base sociopathology of Russo, because whereas Frank is so broken up about what they just went through, Russo, his men died. his men died. It's not my fault my men died. It was bad intel. Which is classic sociopath behavior there. Whatever happened, he doesn't internalize the responsibility for what happened. He says the responsibility lies with someone else, someone who didn't do their job. I did my job, and I am without sin. And that's how he sees himself. Whatever he's going to do, he justifies. Even in the statements he makes earlier about how can he deny all the women of the world all of this. And of course that just sounds like Playboy banter. But the fact of the matter is that there is a quality of it there that no, he wants what is his, and he does not care if it hurts anyone. Because I'm sure there's been a lot of girls that fell for his, pretty baby face and then got their hearts broke. It's hard to be beautiful, let me tell you, Mozz.
What did you think of the standoff between the FBI and David? Where Wolf is screaming at him, "Drop the weapon! Drop the weapon!" And he's like, "I don't have a weapon."
Yeah, well,
I didn't know how Micro had orchestrated his death, and this is one of the scenes where it built up really, really kind of well, and then almost too conveniently. And as good as a show as this is, for him to skate by on the bullet didn't penetrate through my cell phone was a little weak for my taste. So that was one of the scenes where I had a little bit of a problem.
Obviously, it was a Samsung. So, because those things keep on tweeting.
Well, but then again, if it was a Samsung, it would have blown up, maybe.
Good point. And what it is I don't think he orchestrated anything. I think it was a comedy of errors, and he managed to escape. And what happens is that because here's what you know from that scene is Wolf has been corrupt a very long time.
Right, $30 million worth of time.
Exactly, because if he's sitting there saying, he's shouting, "Drop the weapon," so that when he drops this guy, he says, "Oh, his weapon must have fallen in the river," When they
is around him, they can simply lie and say, "Yes, I heard him say drop the weapon. I heard him say drop the weapon."
Yeah, exactly.
At least that much can point towards the story being a little bit true, Exactly. Without lying, they could say that.
But it's very clear that Wolf was sent here to kill this guy. This guy was supposed to die that day. And then, of course, what happens is when his body's not found, they just say, "Well, he's dead. We're going to declare him dead, even though we didn't find the body because it looks better for Wolf if they just declare him dead. If he doctors the reports to save his own butt, to say, no one could have survived that.
Yeah. I also thought it was really smart that as soon as he eyed SWAT in his rear view, he got out of the car, told his family to stay, and went to meet his fate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was really quick thinking.
Yes. Although, again, I think he thought he was going to be arrested, not.
Yeah.
Because it was a 1 in a million chance that he doesn't die there. And that is bulletproof, whatever, that is a classic television trope. And it's a comic book trope too. You'll see any object, as I always say, that's the advantage of being in a 2-dimensional universe, is any object between you and another object is literally impenetrable. That's just how it is. One wonders sometimes why they had to make Captain America's shield out of adamantium when, really anything would have, when a steel shield did just as fine, just. So one of the things we saw in this is, of course, Micro basically explaining to Frank how he managed to lull him into this false sense of security. And basically, with this whole thing of I have to do this, I have to do that, and basically puts him into this thing where there has to be this ritual. so that Frank gets taken off guard, and then Micro jumps him, drugs him, and that's all she wrote. We get our flashback back to Kandahar there, and then when we come back, we see that basically Micro is dressed, and Frank is very mad at getting dropped. And Micro makes the very real point that, look, you need me, I knew I needed you, but you need me just as much. Face it, Frank, you just got rolled by some random spook. That basically, and for what it's worth, basically what he's telling him is like, hey, it's all well and good to go up against bikers and criminals, but anybody that really wants to take you out that is of your own caliber is probably going to take you out.
Yeah, or at least of my caliber,
Oh yeah, and for what it's worth, maybe not even that strong of a caliber,
Yeah.
And this does bring us to that final point, which is that Frank's a blunt instrument, but now with Micro he can be a guided missile. It's once again point and shoot. I point, you shoot, and that is why I think this episode ends a bit on a down note, because it is clear that basically Frank is not his own man at the end of this. He is bound to what he's bound to, and he doesn't have an easy way out. And
right, one could also look at it this way: he was unfinished. He wasn't whole enough to do the task at hand, and now he's amassed a partner, a co-conspirator, somebody that's willing to share some of the burden with him, and he can grow from this.
Yeah. Although
somebody pointed out.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody pointed out a weakness that now he can work towards overcoming.
Although there's this very interesting question I always ask, because like, to me, part of a birth of a hero should be its randomness. Part of a birth of a hero should be that it's not that anything got planned this way. It was an unfortunate series of events that occurred, and that's how you become a hero. So when you have the Batman origin that the death of Bruce Wayne's parents was all Ra's al Ghul's fault, I think it diminishes who Batman is. Likewise for the Punisher. When the Punisher's family is taken from him by a random act of violence, it has a very different meaning than when it's a grand conspiracy. And
right, because if it's just a random person, it could be any one of us. And if it was a grand conspiracy, none of us operate at the level where that would be a problem we would encounter. But if the problem is similar to what we encounter, then we can see ourselves in the characters.
But what I wonder is, and this is my thing, is he being manipulated in this? Is it being presented that, no, the death of your family was a grand conspiracy?
Ooh.
No, but that's not true.
Right. That's interesting.
That Micro, because for what it's worth, in the comics, Micro eventually betrays the Punisher.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Spoilers. I don't know if they're going to do that here, but that's what happens in the comics. And I could totally see Micro manipulating Frank to be his weapon in his war.
Oh, that would be so juicy.
Not Frank's war, yeah.
Oh, man.
And then, of course, once Frank realizes that, then the chicken comes home to roost. But we don't know that yet. I've only seen these 3 episodes, and I can't wait to see what happens next.
So maybe
yeah.
Well, yeah, I think the other thing that the one other thing that I thought was interesting to mention, I wanted to get your take on, was at the very end, Russo, when he came to visit him at the rec center to drop the check off, 2 interesting moments happened. First, he said, "Are you still good for tomorrow?" What was he talking about? I'm like, what did they do together? Anyways, and then the second thing was he looks at Russo and says, "You're a man of wealth and taste," literally pointing out that this guy's the devil,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
That was very interesting. But at the very end, when it is revealed what their plan was to do the next day, they go visit Frank's grave. And it's such an interesting scene because I get the sense that Russo somehow knows Frank is alive, and he's trying to test whether or not Kurt knows, or whether or not Kurt would give him up or tell him.
Yeah, and that is, I think you're right on the nail there. I mean, I think that a guy like Russo is going to assume that Frank's not dead, because not for nothing, this isn't the first time he's been dead. And secondly, as one of my favorite sayings goes, we Yellowbeards are never more dangerous than when we're dead. Frank is certainly a man who is more dangerous dead than alive. So I think that Russo suspects that Frank is alive and is following how he would expect Frank to behave, including reconnecting with certain people in their community. Right. And I imagine that, and for what it's worth, there could be this idea of, much like the Colonel tried to do last season, with this idea of really wanting to recruit Frank. And for what it's worth, there was a period where Frank was recruited by, when he first gets his battle van, is he gets this moneyed interest that is interested in what he does. And I think that's how he first winds up with Micro. That there are basically these law and order types who think that vigilantes should be killing criminals, which raises the question of how much of law and order types they are. I think they eventually betray Frank as well, that he gets this bankroll from these people who say, you have friends in the community that you don't even realize. But, that of course reminds me of the film Falling Down with Michael Douglas.
One of the best ever.
Yes, and when he goes and the army surplus guy hides him.
Oh, you're nothing like me.
Yeah, but he sees this guy as, hey, you're just like me. I bet you'd appreciate this canister of Zyklon, Zyklon D, and it's like, no, not at all. So I don't know where we're going yet, but I smell conspiracy. And that's actually my hope, because I think when it gets revealed that it wasn't a plot to kill Frank, that his family just went to the freaking zoo at one time. They always go to the zoo on Saturdays, but drug dealers don't always go to the zoo on Saturdays. But for what it's worth, if you were drug dealers like that, maybe the idea of going to Central Park makes sense, because if you have rival gangs, you want to be in that public place so that nobody starts shooting.
Right.
And then when someone does start shooting, to eliminate the competition, oh, you know what? See, that's the thing. That's what you find out eventually, is that was the Kingpin. The Kingpin started that fight, not to kill Frank, but just because he wanted everybody to shoot each other. So,
wow.
We'll all find out as we watch these episodes. It'll be exciting. Mozz, if people would like to talk to you about these episodes, where can they find you?
Well, they can reach me at mozzmanzor@gmail.com, or find me on Facebook under Mozz Manzor. That's MOZZMANZOOR.
And of course, you can always write to me that old-fashioned email way, the way our Mozz and Paz once did, at superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. That's superconnectivityblog, all one word, @gmail.com. And of course, follow me on the Twitters as I live tweet various shows. And now I have to live tweet various shows because I only have broadcast now. I no longer have cable and DVRs. I live in, it's like living in the 70s, man. But not in the good way. So, yes. But follow me on the Twitters as I do so, at Charlie Esser. That's CharlieEesser. Look for the two E's in the middle for And I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for enduring your just watching. when you have sinned again. Return and receive your absolution. Good night.